the Chinese announced just yesterday that they're not going to accept any interdiction by American ships in the Indian Ocean.
China possesses the world's largest navy. The country is rapidly accelerating its nuclear capabilities.
There were 3 carrier battle groups operating in the Indian Ocean region.
The Liaoning Bay Naval Support Facility sits 14 miles west of Zhangjiang on the South China Sea coast, a sprawl of concrete piers, fuel bunkers, and covered maintenance sheds stretched across 3 miles of engineered coastline. At 0647 local to Pier 4 is home to 2 Type 052D Luoyang 3 class guided missile destroyers, each 157 meters long, each loaded with 64 vertical launch cells, each carrying a mixed load of YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles and HHQ-9B surface-to-air interceptors. The harbor water is flat. The cranes are still. A fuel tender sits halfway through a transfer on the destroyer nearest the breakwater. A third Type 052D is completing its turn out of the harbor mouth, its wake a thin white scar across water the color of slate. Nobody on those piers has heard a sound that does not belong there. The first Tomahawk Block V, a 3,500-pound cruise missile flying at 550 miles per hour and 40 feet above the wave tops, crosses the breakwater at 0648. It does not hit a ship. It hits the fuel storage complex 200 meters behind Pier 4. The detonation of its 1,000-pound unitary warhead cracks 3 of the 4 above-ground diesel bunkers simultaneously, and the secondary explosions stack upward in columns of black smoke that are visible from 22 miles away. The second Tomahawk arrives 6 seconds later, 90 meters to the east, and opens the ammunition handling building attached to the pierside crane rail. The third comes through the same gap in the breakwater at 0648 and 14 seconds and turns the covered maintenance shed into a structure fire that will burn for 9 hours. 1,100 miles to the southeast, aboard the Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS George Washington, CVN-73, the tactical action officer on duty in the Combat Direction Center confirms receipt of 3 B-Day positive signals relayed via an RQ-4 Global Hawk orbiting at 60,000 feet over the Philippine Sea. She does not smile. There are 5,500 sailors aboard this ship. There is an entire carrier strike group surrounding it. And 6 Chinese destroyers left port 11 hours ago on a heading that points directly at her hull. Each Tomahawk that hit those fuel bunkers cost $2.1 million. The fuel it destroyed will take the People's Liberation Army Navy 14 months to fully replace. Total cost of 3 missiles, $6.3 million. Replacement cost of the infrastructure they erased, north of $400 million. That is a 63-to-1 return on investment, and the war is 19 minutes old. This story does not start here. It starts 72 hours earlier on a Saturday, when a constellation of 8 commercial synthetic aperture radar satellites operated under contract by the National Reconnaissance Office flagged a change at 3 separate planned naval bases within a 6-hour window. At Zhangjiang, Yulin, and Ningbo, destroyer berths that had been occupied for weeks were suddenly empty. Fuel tenders that had been idle were active. And at each base, the harbor patrol boat patterns shifted from random to structured, which in the intelligence community means someone is expecting to move high-value assets and wants the water clear when they do. The National Maritime Intelligence Center in Suitland, Maryland, 8,200 miles from the South China Sea, ran the correlations. 6 Type 052D destroyers had sortied within the same tidal window. Their initial headings, once corrected for standard deception routing, converged on a single point in the Philippine Sea, a box of ocean 340 nautical miles east of Taiwan, directly in the operating area of Carrier Strike Group 5, built around the USS George Washington. 40 miles south of Suitland at the Pentagon, the assessment arrived on the desk of the commander of United States Indo-Pacific Command via secure video teleconference at 22:14 Washington time, Saturday evening. The question was simple. 6 destroyers, each carrying up to 8 YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles, gave the plan a combined first salvo of 48 missiles aimed at one carrier. The YJ-18 is not a simple weapon. It launches as a subsonic cruise missile at roughly 600 miles per hour, flies at wavetop height for up to 290 nautical miles, and then in its terminal phase drops its booster, lights a solid rocket sustainer, and accelerates to Mach 3, 3 times the speed of sound, roughly 2,300 miles per hour, for its final 25 miles of flight. It is, in the language of defense analysts, a supersonic terminal sprint weapon. Think of it as a 2-ton delivery truck that drives casually across the county, then turns into a guided rifle bullet for the last 30 seconds of its trip. 48 of them arriving in a compressed salvo window would stress any Aegis-equipped defense to its theoretical limits. The order that went back across the Pacific was not to retreat. It was to compress the timeline.
Hit first.
hit the logistics that feed those destroyers, and then kill the destroyers before they reach launch range. The George Washington and its escorts were already at a heightened readiness posture. The strike group included the Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser USS Shiloh, CG-67, carrying 122 vertical launch cells. It included 2 Arleigh Burke-class flight IIA destroyers, USS Barry, DDG-52, and USS Mustin, DDG-89, each carrying 96 cells. It included the Arleigh Burke Flight 3 destroyer USS Jack H. Lucas, DDG-125, carrying 96 cells, and the AN/Spy-6 V1 radar, a system so sensitive it can track an object the size of a baseball at a distance of 300 nautical miles. The combined missile inventory of the strike group exceeded 400 cells. Not every cell carried an anti-ship weapon, but enough did. 90 miles north of the George Washington, the Virginia-class fast-attack submarine USS Missouri, SSN 780, had been trailing the southern element of the Chinese destroyer formation for 9 hours. The Missouri carries 12 vertical launch cells loaded with Tomahawk cruise missiles and 4 torpedo tubes capable of firing the Mark 48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedo, a 3,500-pound weapon that runs at 55 knots and can kill anything that floats. The Missouri's captain had a firing solution on the trailing destroyer in the southern pair before the first Tomahawk ever hit Zhangjiang. The 6 Chinese destroyers were organized into 3 pairs, spaced 60 nautical miles apart, running southeast at 18 knots in a formation designed to maximize radar coverage while minimizing the chance that a single attack could catch all 6 together. The planned tactical doctrine behind this formation was sound: spread the assets, force the Americans to divide their defensive attention. Each pair could independently launch its YJ-18 salvo, meaning the carrier would face missiles arriving from 3 different bearings, 60 degrees apart. Any Aegis radar can handle threats from a single direction. Threats from 3 directions at once force the system to timeshare, and timesharing in a missile defense context means gaps. The Chinese commander aboard the lead destroyer, the CNS Hefei, DDG-174, had studied the math. He had run the simulations at the Dalian Naval Academy. The simulation said that 48 YJ-18s arriving from 3 bearings in a window of 90 seconds or less would saturate the strike group's defenses and guarantee 6 to 8 hits. 2 hits from a YJ-18 on a carrier's waterline would be enough to mission kill it. 3 would likely sink it. What the commander of the Hefei didn't know was that the George Washington's E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, an airborne early warning aircraft carrying the AN/APY-9 radar, had held a continuous track on all 6 destroyers since they passed east of Taiwan 14 hours earlier. Every course change, every speed adjustment, every time one pair drifted 2 nautical miles north or south, the E-2D passed that picture, updated every 4 seconds, to every ship in the strike group and to the Missouri running silent at 400 feet below the surface. The Chinese destroyers thought they were approaching an unaware target. They were approaching a prepared kill box, and the kill box had been shaped around them for half a day. 220 miles east of the George Washington, at 0650 local time, 2 minutes after the Tomahawks hit Zhangjiang, the first wave launched. 4F divided by a -18E Super Hornets from Strike Fighter Squadron 27, callsign Royal Maces, rolled off the bow catapults at 8-second intervals. Each carried 2 AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missiles, the LRASM, a 2,500-pound stealthy cruise missile with a range exceeding 200 nautical miles and an autonomous targeting system that can identify and select specific ship types without any human guidance after launch. Each LRASM cost $3.52 million. 8 of them were now airborne, and they had not yet received their final targeting data. That would come from the Hawkeye, which at this moment was updating the Chinese formation's position to within 15 meters of accuracy. 400 nautical miles to the north, aboard the Hefei, the Air Defense Watch officer saw something he did not expect. The radar warning receiver lit with a pulse pattern associated with AN/APY-9 radar, and the bearing put the source aircraft well to his east, between the formation and the American carrier. He reported it. The Hefei's captain ordered an increase to 28 knots and authorized the launch of a BZK-005 reconnaissance drone from the aft flight deck to attempt to refine the carrier's position for targeting. The drone was off the deck in 4 minutes. It would never transmit a single usable image. An SM-6 Block IA fired from the USS Shiloh, traveling at Mach 3.5, approximately 2,700 miles per hour, intercepted at 38 nautical miles from the Hefei at an altitude of 14,000 feet. The drone cost roughly $5 million. The SM-6 that killed it cost $4.8 million. The closest thing to a fair trade either side would see all day. The increase to 28 knots was exactly what the George Washington strike planners wanted. At 18 knots, the Chinese destroyers were conserving fuel, extending their range, and giving themselves flexibility. At 28 knots, they were loud. Loud enough for the Missouri's TB-29A towed sonar array to hold a passive track at 31 nautical miles without any difficulty at all. and loud enough to mask the sound of the 4 Mark 48 ADCAP torpedoes that the Missouri launched at 0659, 2 at each of the 2 Southern destroyers. The Mark 48 ADCAP is not subtle. It weighs 3,500 pounds. It carries a 650-pound high-explosive warhead. It runs at 55 knots and can chase a target through evasive maneuvers for 5 nautical miles using active and passive homing. Its unit cost is approximately $4 million. A Type 052D destroyer cost $900 million. For torpedoes at $4 million each equals $16 million, aimed at $1.8 billion of Chinese naval steel. The math only works in one direction. The 2 Southern destroyers, the CNS Kunming, DDG-172, and the CNS Changsha, DDG-173, detected the torpedoes at 0703 when the Mark 48s went active at a range of 4,200 meters. The Changsha's captain executed an immediate hard turn to port and deployed the Type 726-4 torpedo countermeasure system, which launched a pattern of acoustic decoys designed to seduce the incoming weapon away from the hull. The Kunming went to flank speed and turned to starboard, attempting to open the distance. The Changsha's decoys pulled the first torpedo off course by 400 meters. It circled, reacquired, and re-attacked. The second torpedo ignored the decoys entirely and struck the Changsha 3 meters below the waterline on the port side amidships at 0704. The 650-pound warhead opened a hole in the hull 8 meters wide. The ship's keel flexed. Power to the forward half of the vessel failed within 20 seconds. The Changsha was dead in the water in under a minute. She would capsize and sink in 41 minutes. The Kunming lasted 90 seconds longer. Her turn to starboard presented her stern to the incoming weapons, and the first Mark 48 caught her in the propulsion compartment at 0705. The explosion destroyed both shafts and flooded the engine room. The second torpedo, running 30 seconds behind, hit the hull amidships while the ship was already losing way. The combined damage was not survivable. She settled by the stern and sank in 27 minutes. 2 destroyers gone. 4 torpedoes expended. Total cost, $16 million against $1.8 billion of warships. The South China Sea does not grade on a curve. 180 nautical miles to the north, the middle pair of destroyers, the CNS Xian, DDG-153, and the CNS Yinchuan, DDG-175, had not yet received word. The Hefei's communications officer had transmitted a flash warning at 0704, but the middle pair was operating under emissions control, limiting their radio reception to scheduled windows. Their next scheduled window was 0715. They were, for the 11 most important minutes of their existence, deaf by choice. The 8 LRASMs launched from the Royal Mesas had been in flight for 23 minutes. They flew at 550 miles per hour, 50 feet above the wave tops, their radar-absorbent coatings reducing their radar cross-section to roughly that of a large seabird. At 0713, the missiles received their final targeting update from the E-2D Hawkeye. 4 were assigned to the Xian, 4 to the Yinchuan. The LRASM's onboard AI classified the targets, confirmed they matched the expected radar signature profile of a Type 052D, and began its terminal approach. No further human input was required. No further human input was possible. The Xian's air defense radar detected the first LRASM at a range of 9 nautical miles, at 550 miles per hour, that gave the ship's combat system 58 seconds to respond. The HHQ-9B surface-to-air missile needs 8 seconds to launch and 6 more seconds to achieve guidance lock. The Xian fired 4 HHQ-9Bs. 1 intercepted an incoming LRASM at 3 nautical miles. The explosion was close enough to the ship to spray shrapnel across the forward deck. The second HHQ-9B missed. The third had not yet reached its target when the first LRASM hit the Xian superstructure just below the bridge at 0714 and 32 seconds. The 1,000-pound penetrating warhead entered the ship, traveled 6 feet through internal bulkheads, and detonated inside the Combat Information Center. Every screen went dark. Every radar feed ended. The Xian's air defense died with the room designed to control it. The second LRASM hit 4 seconds later, midships, directly into the VLS cells. The resulting secondary explosions from the ship's own missile magazines generated a fireball that rose 500 feet. The third and fourth LRASMs hit a ship that was already breaking apart. Both struck below the waterline. The Xian sank in 11 minutes. The Yinchuan had 12 additional seconds of warning because the LRASMs assigned to it approached from a slightly wider angle. 12 seconds. The Yinchuan fired 6 HHQ-9Bs and activated the Type 1130 close-in weapon system, an 11-barrel Gatling gun that fires 11,000 rounds per minute of 30mm ammunition. Think of a garden hose that shoots tungsten at 3,000 feet per second. The Type 1130 hit 1 LRASM at 800 meters, close enough that burning debris struck the Yinchuan's forward deck. An HHQ-9B hit a second. 2 LRASMs got through. The first struck the aft helicopter hangar and detonated inside the structure, gutting the entire stern section. The second hit the hull at the waterline beneath the forward VLS block. the Yinchuan did not explode the way the Xian did.
She burned.
The fires reached the missile magazines at 0731, and the secondary detonation split the ship in two. Both have sank within 6 minutes of each other. The cost of the 8 LRASMs that killed 2 destroyers, $28.16 million. The cost of the 2 destroyers, $1.8 billion. Someone in a defense budget hearing would later describe this ratio as efficient. Someone else would call it the math that ended the planned surface doctrine for a generation.
Both were right.
120 nautical miles north, the Hefei and the 6th destroyer, the CNS Guiyang, DDG-119, now knew everything. The flash traffic had arrived. The Hefei's captain understood the situation with the clarity of a man watching a door close. His 2 southern destroyers were on the seabed. His 2 middle destroyers were burning. He had 16 YJ-18 anti-ship missiles left between his pair, and the carrier that killed his formation was still 290 nautical miles to his southeast, at the extreme edge of the YJ-18's range. He could fire now, except that the missiles would arrive at their fuel limit with no margin for terminal maneuvering, or he could close the distance and accept whatever was coming toward him while he did it.
He chose to fire. Every missile. All 16. 8 from Hefei, 8 from Guiyang.
The salvo left the rails at 0722 in a ripple launch that took 48 seconds to complete. 16 YJ-18s, each weighing 4,700 pounds, each carrying a 600-pound semi-armor-piercing warhead, climbed to 100 feet, leveled off, and headed southeast at 600 miles per hour. At 265 nautical miles from target, they had 26 minutes of flight time before reaching their terminal sprint zone. It was the largest anti-ship salvo the plan had ever fired in anger. The Hefei's captain had done exactly what his doctrine trained him to do. His doctrine did not account for what was already 40,000 feet above his ship. 2F divided by a -18F Super Hornets from Strike Fighter Squadron 102, callsign Diamondbacks, had been orbiting at that altitude for 14 minutes, each carrying 2 AGM-84D Harpoon missiles and an ESQ-228 at FLIR targeting pod. The Harpoon is an older weapon, subsonic, 530 miles per hour, with a range of 67 nautical miles and a 488-pound warhead. It costs $1.8 million. It is not stealthy. It is not brilliant. It does not have AI. What it has is simplicity and a target that just broadcast its position to every sensor in the Western Pacific by firing 16 missiles in 48 seconds. The Diamondbacks rolled in. 4 Harpoons dropped from the pylons and lit their turbojets. At the same time, the USS Barry fired 4 SM-6 missiles in anti-ship mode. The SM-6, originally designed as an air defense interceptor, can be used against surface targets at Mach 3.5 using its 140-pound blast fragmentation warhead. It is a $5 million missile being used as a 700-mile-per-hour battering ram against a ship's superstructure. The Navy considers this an acceptable use case. The accountants consider it insane. Both are correct. The Hefei's combat system tracked the Harpoons at 22 nautical miles and the SM-SIXS at 34 nautical miles. The problem was volume. 8 incoming weapons from 2 different bearings at 2 different speeds. The Hefei allocated its HHQ-9BS to the faster SM-6 threat and fired its Type 1130 CDWS at the closer Harpoons. The Guiyang, running 4 nautical miles abeam, did the same. The Hefei killed 1 SM-6.
It killed 1 Harpoon.
The Type 1130 hit a second Harpoon at 600 meters but did not detonate the warhead, and the damaged missile tumbled into the sea 200 meters short of the hull. The remaining SM-6 hit the Hefei at 2,700 miles per hour directly on the forward radar array. At that velocity, even a 140-pound warhead transfers energy like a freight train hitting a parked car.
The radar was gone. The mast was gone.
The bridge windows blew inward. The Hefei was blind, still floating, and unable to guide any defensive weapon. The last Harpoon hit the hull 11 seconds later at the waterline amidships. The 488-pound warhead punched through the single hull and detonated inside the forward engine room. The Hefei lost propulsion, lost power, and began to list 15 degrees to port within 3 minutes. The Guiyang intercepted both SM-SIXS assigned to it.
A genuine achievement.
The HHQ-9B system performed exactly as designed, but the 2 Harpoons came in 8 seconds later from a bearing the ship's radar had momentarily deprioritized while tracking the supersonic threats. The first Harpoon hit the aft superstructure. The second hit the VLS block. The secondary explosions began at 0739 and continued for 22 minutes. The Guiyang capsized at 0801 and sank stern first. The Hefei, still afloat but listing and burning, was struck by a second wave. The USS Muston fired 2 additional Harpoons from 48 nautical miles.
Both hit.
The Hefei rolled to port and sank at 0814, 1 hour and 27 minutes after the first Tomahawk struck Zhangjiang.
6 destroyers.
0 remaining. Total time from first shot to last ship lost, 1 hour and 10 minutes. Now the 16 YJ-18 missiles the Hefei and Guiyang had launched were still in the air. They had no mid-course guidance updates because their launchers were at the bottom of the South China Sea. The missiles flew on their pre-programmed bearing, relying on their internal navigation to reach the search basket where their active radar seekers would turn on and look for the carrier. The problem was that the George Washington had altered course by 20 degrees and increased speed to 30 knots the moment the launch was detected. At 290 nautical miles, a 20-degree course change over 26 minutes of flight time moves the ship approximately 13 nautical miles from the predicted intercept point. The YJ-18's terminal seeker has a search cone of roughly 25 nautical miles. Some of the missiles would still find the basket. Most would not. 9 of the 16 YJ-18s flew past the strike group's outer boundary and continued southeast until their fuel exhausted. They hit the ocean one by one, 2-ton missiles dropping into empty water at 600 miles per hour. Each one cost approximately $1.5 million. 9 of them, $13.5 million of guided steel aimed at a patch of ocean that contained nothing but fish. 7 found the search basket and activated their terminal seekers. 7 radar signatures appeared on the An/Spy, 6 aboard the Jack H. Lucas at a range of 47 nautical miles. The SBY-6 classified them in 2 seconds. The Jack H. Lucas, the USS Shiloh, and the USS Barry began firing SM-3 Block IIA and SM-6 interceptors. The SM-3 Block IIA is a $14 million missile designed to kill ballistic missiles in space. Using it against a cruise missile at 50 feet is like using a fire truck to fill a water glass, but when 7 missiles with supersonic terminal sprint capability are inbound, you use what you have and argue about cost later. The Aegis system operated the way 40 years of engineering said it would. 12 interceptors were fired at 7 targets. The first YJ-18 was killed at 29 nautical miles by an SM-6 that hit it head-on during the subsonic cruise phase, before it could begin its Mach 3 sprint. The second and third were killed during the sprint phase at 11 and 8 nautical miles, respectively, by SM-SIXS that maneuvered at 40 GS to match the target's evasive terminal weave. The fourth was killed at 4 nautical miles by the Shiloh's SM-6. The fifth was killed by a rolling airframe missile, the RIM-116, from the George Washington at 2.1 nautical miles. The sixth was hit by the Phalanx CWS, a 20mm Gatling cannon firing 4,500 rounds per minute, at a range of 1,400 meters. The rounds shredded the missile's guidance section, and it tumbled into the water 900 meters from the carrier's hull. The spray from the impact reached the flight deck. The 7th YJ-18 was never intercepted. It passed between the defensive arcs of the Barry and the Shiloh at an altitude of 8 feet, completed its Mach 3 terminal sprint, and struck the ocean 340 meters astern of the George Washington. Its seeker had locked onto a Nulka active decoy, a rocket-propelled electronic warfare device launched from the carrier's aft decoy launchers 40 seconds earlier. The Nulka costs $500,000. It had convinced a $1.5 million missile that a hovering point of electronic noise was a 100,000-ton aircraft carrier. The missile believed it until it hit the water. At 0827, the sky was empty. The sea was empty of Chinese warships. The George Washington turned back into the wind and resumed flight operations. The air boss called the next launch cycle. Fuel crews moved across the deck. The ship had come within 340 meters of taking a hit from a weapon traveling at 2,300 miles per hour, and the operational response was to go back to work. 6 Type 052D destroyers, $5.4 billion. The Liaoning Bay fuel and ammunition infrastructure, $400 million. Total plan losses, $5.8 billion. Total U.S. munitions expended, approximately $280 million, including Tomahawks, LRASMs, Harpoons, SM-SIXS, SM-3s, Mark 48 torpedoes, rolling airframe missiles, and 4,500 rounds of 20mm Phalanx ammunition. 1 Nulka decoy at $500,000. Ratio, roughly 21-to-1. The Hefei's captain had done everything right. His formation was sound. His doctrine was current. His missiles were capable. His single assumption was that the Americans would not know the exact composition, bearing, and speed of his formation 14 hours before he intended to fire. The E-2D Hawkeye, an aircraft that looks like a turboprop commuter plane with a dinner plate bolted to its back, had made that assumption fatal. It orbits at 25,000 feet, sees every radar emission within 350 nautical miles, and feeds targeting data to every friendly asset in real time. It costs $260 million. The 6 destroyers it helped kill cost $5.4 billion. It was the most expensive dinner plate in history, and on this day, it was worth every cent. The plan lost 6 capital warships, 1 drone, 16 anti-ship missiles, and the logistical output of a major naval support facility in 1 hour and 27 minutes. The U.S. Navy did not lose a ship, did not lose an aircraft, and did not lose a sailor. The closest call was a supersonic missile that hit a decoy the size of a trash can 340 meters from the carrier's stern.
War is not fair. War is math.
And on this day the math was 21-1. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on how an Ohio-class submarine can end a war without surfacing. Bye for now.